just let a few more come on. How we doing? There we go. Good morning, everyone. I know it's Friday. Come on, you can do better than that. It's wonderful to be back in Camden for the Treasurer's Town Hall. I'm Mike Gower. We have a lot of good things to talk through today, and then we'll be available for questions and pretty much anything you want to talk through. Kathy Detloff and I will give a finance update. Dave Finkel will talk about procurement initiatives, and then ethics and compliance from Casey Woods and Miranda Alfonso Williams. So we've got a lot to cover, but we'll still leave plenty of time for open discussion. So I'll turn it over to Kathy. And welcome to all those who are on the web.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It's a great opportunity to come out to Camden and talk about things that are going on. But I just wanted to talk about something starting off great that really happens here at Rutgers all across the campuses, and that's Rutgers Day. I'm actually an alumni like many of you, and I remember I went to New Brunswick, and I remember it was Ag Field Day, which Ag Field Day has actually been going on for more than 100 years, but now it's much part of a much bigger day, which is called Rutgers Day, and it always takes place that last Saturday in April, and they have different activities on all campuses. So just learning about everything that was done between having Jello brains in New Brunswick and some great activities with Legos in Newark, and here I heard there was a fantastic rock, paper, scissors competition, as well as kids dressing up as judges. So that's awesome. So just getting into some of the finance updates and things that we've done, it was actually a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, that me and my team went out and did the road show with the open sessions, and I think we were here 2 different days when we started talking about what we called internally as stopping the bleeding, right? We knew that some of the things weren't working as we had intended with the implementation, but we also knew we couldn't fix everything at once. So we said, how do we make improvements knowing that we'll have to go back later? So I'm coming back a year later just to say a big thank you to all of you, because we've made so much progress in the last year, basically doing what we said we were going to do during those open sessions. So there are those things that we took care of immediately, but then there are those things that we are still working on. You know, we went through that whole motto, we're going to clean in 19, and that's exactly what we've been doing. So we had that goal just a year ago of improving how we support our operations by making the chart of accounts simpler to use, ensuring the data are accurate and easily reportable across the university, and making certain that the general ledger interacts seamlessly with the project ledger. So we're in much better shape, and I could tell you standing here before you today, I feel a lot better about how things are going than I did just a year ago. So just to review some of the things that we've done, the sponsored and non-sponsored master project data ensures accurate and consistent projects to general ledger accounting. So what we did at the time last year is we locked down for grant fund types. We said no more entry into the general ledger, and that's worked really well. Now we're going back and looking at some of our other restricted funds, looking to do exactly the same thing. So there's still that seamless consistency between the general ledger and the project ledger across even more funds than we did originally. We had the subledger accounting rules, so that made sure that both the revenues and the expense followed the project setup. At that time, we said for non-sponsored projects, we were still going to allow the user to input the location and the business line. We're going back now and saying, is that really the best thing to do? Maybe we should rethink that and have, no matter whether it's sponsored or non-sponsored, everything follow project setup. So you'll be hearing some conversations about that going forward. I think one of the biggest things we did and had the most bang for the buck was the cross-validation rules. So we ensured that only those chart segments that belong together can actually be used together. We went back and looked at the segment value descriptions, making sure we didn't have things like other, and making sure that we knew that when people put in the chart segments, they actually was a good description of what they were using. Another big one was correcting the balances when we deleted the invalid chart strings. So if you recall at the time, we said we're going to stop allowing people to use invalid chart string combinations. But we knew that there was activity in there, but we also knew at the time we couldn't take on moving all those balances, finding where the transactions belonged, and all of those types of activities. that would be necessary to clean up the balances at the time. Remember, the goal was to stop the bleeding, basically, stop the bad activity, and then we'd figure it out. So right now, this is when we're talking about, between now and the actual close of fiscal year 19, cleaning up all these balances that currently live in invalid chart string combinations that people are no longer using. So that's going to be a big initiative over the next coming months. And then we have the accounting procedures and guidance on financial transactions. So this is just our way of saying, how should everybody be doing things? Not because there's a right and a wrong, but because we want consistency across the university. And we've made a lot of leeway with this. So last July, we talked about funding transfers, expense recoveries, and faculty funds. So they're all in place. Just a few months later, we started looking with the Educational Opportunity Fund, how to use a different fund, Fund 165, for internally designated funds to ensure we weren't inappropriately making transfers to plant in lieu of a true designated fund. We are doing more and more on salaries and wage and fringe and FICA and Medicare to make sure we're handling that properly across all units in the institution. And now we're looking at how is the best way to use and also to report the use of prior year balances. Going forward, we are still working on improving our month-end close. How do we use strategic funds? What do we do with internal charges? Mastering the use of auxiliary funds, RU corporate and corporate pass-through accounts, portfolio management. So we're continuing to identify those things where we could benefit from consistent procedures across the university. And we want your input on things like that, right? Where do we need a procedure? Where do you know that you're doing something one way, but your colleague is doing it another, and you know that we probably need to be doing it the same way? So my question for you is, what is the biggest difference that you have seen between this year and a year ago today? I think it was warmer in May last year than it is right now. No difference? Is reporting any easier? Yes. Okay. Are there fewer, we were just struggling so much with these chart string combinations that didn't make sense. I'm assuming we're not seeing as much of that. But if I'm wrong, you need to tell me. All right, I get nothing. I'm thinking everything's perfect if I don't get anything, just saying. All right, Tom. Go, Tom.
I was waiting. All the implementations that you made make total sense from the town perspective and the roll up to the board of governors. So we're heading in the right direction with financial reporting. I do have some concerns about our work-life balance to accomplish that. It's been very difficult with, we've been inundated with finance. So that's not a big difference, but it's problematic. But
So tell me a little bit more. So does it take you longer to do the same thing, or?
I used to brag to the New Brunswick accountants and say, you know what, I'm done closing on July 31st, and I get all of August to bask in the sun. While the New Brunswick accountants that are in the controller's office, they don't get a summer because they're closing the books through August. Then they have to do an audit through, October 31st. So I always felt bad for them. But now, under the way we do things now, we have to close in July when nobody really cares about July numbers. We have to close in August, and nobody really cares about August numbers. We're doing a budget spread in August. So I might take a week off, and then I have to crunch a budget spread. Then the end of the first quarter. Then the half. Then we have a budget to develop. Then we have a Q2 forecast and then a Q3 forecast. So I just got through Q2 forecast, budget, Q3 forecast. So I'm like dead right now.
So I think you bring up a really good point where typically at Rutgers, historically I should say, we were doing things just on an annual one-time basis. And what you're exemplifying is just that it is really an ongoing fluid process. I would argue that when we get good at it, it should make each iteration much easier, right? So when you were only looking at your budget once a year, you had to go back and look at 12 months of activity and say, okay, what happened, what caused this, why are we doing this? To where if it becomes really fluid, it should be a little easier each time. I'm not saying it's easier. It's just very different. It's very different than the way we've been doing things, but it makes us better. And I do think that it really helps improve making informed business decisions at the vice president level, the dean level, the chancellor level. All of that becomes so important. But it's more, right? It's more of a year-round process. And you're not the only one recognizing that. It's definitely happening across the board. What I thought you were actually going to get at, which would be a great conversation to have, is, you know, we do the reporting for the Board of Governors, and they are ultimately my end customer as they are Mike's, right? But how do we bring the reporting together so it's one set of reports that can be used for management and for Board of Governors, that we're all talking from the same book of truth? And we try every day to make that just a little bit better, because I know it's not there yet. I do. I know it's not there yet. That we all, so how do we get that where we have the Board of Governors report, that eventually we get the reporting to the point where you can see the transactional data that's rolling up to that easier than you can today, right? So that we're all using the same set of reports, and I don't have, oh, here's what I have to do for the budget office and for the finance office, but here's really what I'm using to manage with my dean or my vice president. That's not good. So we're hoping to make that a little better as well. So one of the big things this year that I think Tom was a great lead into was the Enterprise Planning and Budget Cloud Service. So while we always had Hyperion on-premise, we went to the cloud and we really tried to improve what we're doing. So we are nearing the end of the budget cycle, and one of the big differences this year, I think from the end user perspective, was workforce. So I thank you, because I know that was a huge, huge lift, getting all those positions in, getting the charging instructions cleaned up so that it was actually usable. I will tell you from the perspective of our office, we now can understand salary and wage budgets like we never were able to before. And what we're noticing right off the bat is that they're better budgets, right? So historically, some people may have just taken their prior year budget and increased it by 2 or 3%, depending on what the salary increases were. But then when it came time to budget variance reporting, and we said, why is it different? They were like, because it didn't come out to 2 or 3%. Right? There was really no detail behind it, because it was too tedious to try to do in a spreadsheet. So workforce has enabled us to get so much better on our salary and wage budgets, and that's 64% of the total university budget. So if we're good at that, we just got to get a little better at a couple other things, and then we're really good to go. But if we can manage that 64% in a better and a different way, I know it was a lot. I do. I know it was a lot. But it should get easier and easier as time goes on. So we are able to understand that better. We're able to align our fringe benefits in a different way, particularly those FICA and Medicare calculations. Last minute last year, we tried to do it in a spreadsheet, worked real fast, and we got them in, but it wasn't the same as having this type of tool to work with. So I'm happy about that. What can we do to improve the process next year? What did you struggle with in the budget process this year? So I'll tell you one thing, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, right? It's the timing. So we could start earlier, but the earlier you start, the less you know about what's really going to happen next year. But the tighter the time frame, I think the less better product you get. So how do we balance that? So this year we brought the data into workforce in the middle of January. And in some instances, it required a lot of cleanup. Should we be bringing that in earlier next year? Or is that the right time?
I don't think so.
I asked an either or, Tom.
Yes.
So you think the timing was right?
Yeah, because January you had, and then we have what? We have to develop a budget. It's better when you bring it in later, because people get in grades, upgrades, people get terminated, and when you bring it in closer to the budget, then it's more actual. If you bring it in August, then a lot of things happen, and then you have more cleanup.
Okay. What's your thoughts, Terry?
Draft.
What do you mean draft?
It's two iterations. Like imagine you're doing a term paper,
right?
Oh, God, no.
You start with a draft. But you start with a draft, and then you go to final product.
Does that duplicate the work?
I'm going to say that it spreads the work,
Okay.
because at the final, you're looking at, did I make the right assumptions for my tuition, my scholarship? Do I have changes to my salary? And then the rest of your items, the smaller items are done.
Okay.
When would you suggest doing the draft?
Sorry, everybody. I'm going to say halfway through.
Oh, wait, what do you mean? Now you really, so wait, you're saying do another iteration after January? Or you're saying do one?
I'm saying that the first iteration starts around January with the tweaks later on.
Ah, okay. So you're not saying start the whole process early. You're saying bring in another version later just to make sure you're on.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's Terry Frank, T-F-R. No,
Sorry, folks.
just for those people online. Without my counterparts here from the Controller's Office, I just did want to say we do have monthly close. We're trying to get better and better at this. This should make the annual close much easier. We noticed last year when we did a really hard close at the end of March, we were able to have our auditors come in and start their field work. So that way when we actually closed in June, they only had 3 months of material to look at rather than 12. So I will say that the accountants did get a little bit of sun this year, more than they did last year. So we do have the monthly close, and each month it looks similar in that how many business days after do we do different things. So we're in the crux of the April close. May will look pretty much the same. And then here are just some preliminary numbers for June, which are really tentative, and they will change, but just to give you an idea of what we're thinking about and how that plays a part. And these monthly closes really should support all of our Board of Governors reporting and monthly reporting. So we want to get to a spot where at any point in time, so right now our Board of Governors meetings don't coincide with like a monthly close or a quarterly close. They're just not scheduled that way. So where I came in early and said, well, why don't we start with a quarterly close? Well, because if we're reporting to the board and the timing just works out that we have to do November, we have to be able to do November, or we have to be able to do April. We know the numbers are not going to be perfect. They're not going to be as good as year end, but we have to get to a point that they're usable and they'll inform decisions and they can give leadership, whether it be board or the president and his leadership team, a good idea of where we are. Particularly if something were to come down mid-year and a decision would have to be made. We can't say, oh, wait, we got to go back and close all those 6 months. We have to be able to say, here we are today, give you a good sense of where we are so they can make better data-driven decisions than we've been able to do in the past. And again, doing this should make that year-end close just a little bit easier. So right now, we are actually starting all of our meetings with the KPMG audit team and the internal team to talk about just all the different things that have to go on during closing, get better prepared. Last year was a much better year than the years prior to that. And we're just trying to work with them so we have a schedule down so there's not fire drills at the end, right? I don't want to be calling and saying, but I need this, and by the way, they need it in 3 days. So we're really laying out a plan, so it will be a huge timeline and a project management plan of everything that we need to get done. I'm going to stop there before handing it over to Mike. Does anybody have any questions? So as Mike indicated, we're going to stick around. We're going to have some great conversations after, but if anything comes up, whether it's a topic we decided to discuss or not, I'm happy to have the conversations with you. So again, thank you for having us today.
So before getting into F&A, I wanted to pick up on the question about closes. And when I got here, I was mystified for the first little while, and before I found out that the university didn't close its books except once a year. Now UMD and J, when they came in, they were closing every month. And the question is, why is that important? Well, the reason it's important, among a lot of other things, is that so that you can compare 1 month in a year reasonably to the month in the prior year. We had circumstances where different activities and different transactions were being done whenever, as opposed to when they should be done. And it was very, very difficult to say, do we have a real variance of operations or not? So going to this also, yes, why would you do July when nobody cares? Well, because somebody does care. We still need to know, okay, did we have a July and an August that were typical, or did something happen? And recognize that, we have year-round activity now, including patient care, which doesn't have a academic calendar. And we need to be able to know those things are on target or they're behind target or whatever. So there are real reasons for doing it, but what we want to do is get to a point where it is very straightforward and normal to do. And there are steps that will be coming forward in terms of a product called financial consolidation and close that will help to promote the workflow and in some cases automate some of the transactional work that has to happen. But it is really to get that kind of a product at the end of a month. As Kathy suggested, sometimes we do need to report November rather than December, because that's what lines up with a finance committee meeting. And while that is not typical, you have to make sure November is good. And what you expected to do then is done. That's the other reason why calendarizing, when we come to you in, when do we do that, in August? August, to calendarize the budget, meaning you tell us when transactions would happen in spotty places. Like I always use when we pay insurance premiums or debt service payments, or we have 3 payrolls in a month, looking at Steve, rather than 2. We need to reflect those so that that changes month to month or year to year, which month that happens. So we want to take that into account so we're not seeing a blip, but recognizing that it's because we had 3 payrolls or something to that effect. All right, let me talk to you about F&A, facilities and administrative costs. We have this great graphic that we got from Educational Advisory Board, EAB, along with some help from an organization called Council on Governmental Relations, that I really do think takes some of the mystery out of F&A. I think it does a good job in terms of breaking up, in terms of research activities, what are direct costs, those things that are actually run in the lab, those things that are actually contributing to the specific project. If you can count it towards a specific activity, you want to capture it there. That's a direct cost. Whereas the F&A, facilities and administrative pieces, are the indirects. Those are the things that you can't attribute to just one activity or a specific set of activities. And when you see them like this, the F and the A, it makes sense. Building, interest on debt, operation maintenance, the cost of the library, utilities are in there too, and administration, of which these are the categories: general, departmental. Departmental includes the college administration functions as well, sponsored projects, and student. So it's the 2 of these that constitute how much does it cost to support research here. And what we are supposed to do, and we contract or we have an agreement with the federal government, is they're supposed to reimburse us for the total cost of a research project, as other sponsors are supposed to do so. Now, I say are supposed to because it doesn't always work out that way. But we go through a major process every number of years for reasons that I'm not quite sure why. For both Rutgers and UMD&J, the last time they went through this process was 2008. Usually it happens every 3 to 4 years. So we had a massive amount of cleanup to do, and also dealing with the fact that we went from 2 universities to 1 happened this year. But we were successful in negotiating with the feds, And it is a negotiation. They are on the hook primarily for paying the category on the right. So therefore, they want to minimize that. We, on the other hand, want to maximize it because we need to get reimbursed for those costs. We're outlaying those costs every day. We want to get reimbursed for the total cost of research, and therefore, it was a negotiation. I think it turned out pretty well for us, and we actually have what is turned into a 5-year agreement that goes back to last July. Now for last July through this June, there's not a change in regards to Rutgers University Camden. There was a change relative to the health sciences. UMD&J had a higher rate. We have now combined that to a single rate, which was the same as the rest of the university had prior to that. But then all units of the university will go up on July 1 to 56%. So that effective 1-point increase will, and that applies to existing grants. It's not just new ones, it's ones that are already in play that are subject to the full rate. That rate will last for 2 years, and then year after that, July 1 of 21, it'll go up to 57%, and that'll last until the end of fiscal 23. We do have a number of other rates. They're rarely used. Other sponsored activity is sometimes used when there is clinical trial or certain types of off-campus activities. The National Transit Institute is a very particular grant program in New Brunswick. And then there is an off-campus rate when we're not utilizing our own space. The big difference there is we're not using our space, so therefore we're just getting reimbursed for administrative activity. So going back to what F&A is, and Shay came up with this, right? So Shay Smith is our Director of Cost Analysis and Reporting, and so this will be great with the faculty. I can see it now. Explaining F&A using a Chick-fil-A sandwich. How's that? So think of Chick-fil-A sandwich as your research project, okay? You have a bun, you have a pickle, you have chicken, and you have a menu price of $5. If you add cheese, that's an extra 35 cents. That's a direct cost. You want to do that. You add bacon, you have $1. You have lettuce, you have 50 cents, which is crazy they charge you for lettuce, but never mind that. So direct costs are identifiable to each sandwich. But the bun, the pickle, and the chicken on the original sandwich doesn't really cost $5 by themselves. The $5 built into that are the cashier's salary. That's the general administration. The salary of the cooks making the sandwiches, that's the same as our sponsored administration. The deep fryers, the ovens, the equipment used to make the sandwich, that's our equipment depreciation. The restaurant building itself, that's the building depreciation, and the utilities to power the building are operations and maintenance. So you need all of those things to get your sandwich. But those latter ones are the indirect, the F&A piece. The business would not incur those costs if they did not sell the sandwich. If we didn't do the research, more likely or not, we would not have a lot of those costs. So I think that's a pretty good analogy. These are real costs. Sometimes faculty think that this is extra revenue to us. And I've had those conversations over 30 some odd years in research institutions. We're making money on that. And I always have to turn that back to say, no, we're not. We're getting reimbursed for costs that we put out. The fact is that research costs money and is always subsidized. by an institution. There may be small projects or particular activities that they may, in fact, bring in more money than they cost. Those are rare. The typical research functions require somewhere between 35 and 55 cents on the dollar of subsidy across the country. That was based on a research study that was done across medical schools, but is pretty typical of research institutions. We subsidize research. Universities subsidize research, from other funding sources. So that's why it is very important to get every reimbursement that we can possibly get that we're due. This gets into issues sometimes when we contract with the state, because the state says, well, you're getting your appropriation, you don't need to be getting indirect costs from us. Well, that's not that appropriation. If it had been going up year after year after year, that argument might hold. But it has been stagnant or gone down in the 6 cycles that I have been here. And I would dare say that it's gone down substantially in the time that you've seen it, Larry. So that really doesn't hold water. But it is a difficult conversation we have to have each time we come to one of those things. There are going to be a number of open sessions about F&A, and these are important. There was, I think, Terry, you were saying we'd like to get some PIs to these to understand what F&A is and what is going to happen. We have a contract now with the federal government that says these rates will change, and that's going to happen, but we need to make sure that everyone understands what that means. The F&A flows back to the responsibility centers. It's an important element in their budget. So we have a number of these sessions coming up where there'll be in-depth conversations about and training around the F&A change that's going to happen in July. Again, it's more impactful for RBHS units that came from UMD&J, but it is impactful for everybody. You see for Camden TBD, we will be getting that scheduled shortly and communicated out broadly here. And then the folks at the bottom here for inquiries, this is both in the proposal and pre-award area, post-award, and then general questions about F&A. Shay is our resource for that. So I want to just stop there if there are any questions about this. And of course, these sessions will be really important for being able to go through the details of this. And these will also, we'll be recording these and posting them as well. Any questions about F&A? Y'all are easy here. If you have any, again, we're going to have a general open Q&A after this, and we'll be around. This is an area that gets technical, but we need to be able to help you in communicating it with investigators and your deans. Okay? All right. So I'd like to introduce a couple of people who are new to Rutgers, who are visiting down here today. They are colleagues of Larry's that have just joined us in similar roles at the other units. Romain Bataille, right here. Come on, stand up. Didn't we just take that this morning? So she's the Chief Business Officer for Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And then Amber Randolph, who is right over here, is the Chief Business Officer for Rutgers University Newark. Both of them joined within a week of each other. They are come from different backgrounds, and those backgrounds are going to be very impactful for the university, their universities, and the university as a whole. They're going to be excellent colleagues for me, for Kathy, for Larry. We really pleased that they're here. And they're here today to get a feel for the Rutgers University Camden campus. So they're going to be touring and then have various meetings, and I think, Larry, you're taking them to lunch or something. So welcome to both of you, and welcome to Rutgers Camden. All right, I just want to take a break for general Q&A here before we move over to the procurement section. Okay, Mr. Finkel. You want this or this? Okay. David Finkel.
Thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here in Camden. Appreciate the time today to talk a little bit about what's going on in procurement. So we have, as we often do, have several initiatives going on in procurement. We are an evolving organization, and our goal is to best serve the university. So one of the programs that we just launched that you may or may not be aware of, but wanted to emphasize here today, is our ACE program. This was a joint initiative between procurement and university communications and marketing to procure a series of contracts with multiple suppliers who have expertise in the areas that you see listed here. So website design, other marketing areas, graphic design, photography, writing, editing, creative services, if you will. And the vendors were all trained on Rutgers brand standards, which was crucial. And we have more than 60, actually about 70 suppliers under contract now as a result. And those vendors are all available in RU Marketplace to order from. And so when you're ordering services, there's a method of engagement based upon the size of the project, but more or less these are the vendors that we would recommend that you use for creative services. And vendors come from all parts of the state, so geographically they could be convenient if that's important. Also various sizes, large firms, smaller firms, mid-sized firms. So it really addresses a lot of the needs that we have here at the university in this area. Another initiative that we are looking at and we're actually implementing right now has to do with supplier maintenance. I know one of the pain points for a lot of you has been the ability to get suppliers set up in the system for you to do business with them. And we recognize that and some of the challenges that we have. And we feel that the best way to address that is what we've done. We've gone through a process where we looked at a couple of different methods and different tools, and we settled on a company called PaymentWorks. And what they provide is an onboarding tool. It will be more directly involved with the suppliers. We hope to go live with this right around the end of the fiscal year, the beginning of July. And what it will mean is new suppliers at that point will no longer be requested through the RU Marketplace system. You will submit a request in this system, which will be available through single sign-on, to add a supplier to the database. And you'll give us some basic information about that supplier and the reason as to why you want to add that supplier. Could be to issue a purchase order, it could be to make a payment through a check request, the same suppliers that you use today in our system. We'll review that, approve it just to make sure that take a look at it to see if it's okay to add that supplier, and then they will be invited to register with PaymentWorks and therefore become part of our system. And the registration process is handled by the supplier itself. So the supplier will be providing all of the necessary information for us to do business with them, including attaching documentation that we really don't have a systematic approach to now, things like insurance forms, ownership disclosure forms, and of course the infamous iced form, which causes a lot of pain for people. So that process is being moved into the supplier onboarding stage, which will make us more efficient downstream as you place orders and look to do business. So it might be a little bit more work on the front end, particularly and primarily for the suppliers, but it'll take a lot of that burden off of you as end users, as well as our staff will be able to look at this on the front end before things go a little bit further down the road, and we sometimes run into some problems there. So we expect that it'll be about 7 to 10 days to onboard new suppliers, but that's screening them for suspension and debarment issues, which is obviously crucial, particularly in the area of research and healthcare. It enables us to take a look at our supplier database and rationalize it to see whether or not do we really need this 50-second supplier to provide consulting services. We can maybe make some of those decisions before they come on board. And then all this information that gets put in by the supplier and ultimately down the road will be updated by the supplier as well, will be fed into Oracle, and that will be our repository for all of our supplier data. And then what's needed to be fed over to RU Marketplace for use in that system will come from Oracle. So that's the plan over the next couple of months. We'll have a lot more information, including training sessions, but we think that this will be a much more efficient way of handling our supplier database, as well as make sure that we remain compliant. And really, it's a risk management aspect as well because of the insurance and some of the other forms that we're going to be handling on the front end. So before I take any questions on either one of those, I do want to mention two other things. We are revising and revamping our website. We're going to have a launch of that before the end of the fiscal year. Hopefully that website will be more user-friendly. It'll have a lot of the same information that you see on our website today, plus there'll be more information with respect to how to find products and services, which is a big push that we're making now, getting all that content in there. Will hopefully be a little bit more transparent in that respect, so you can get that information yourself without having to call our help desk if that's possible. The other thing is we've also launched a series of procurement days. Generally the first Wednesday of the month. We've done this the last 2 months. We go out onto the campuses. We've got anywhere from 5 to 10 people from across all of the areas of procurement. So it's purchasing, it's AP, it's expense management, everything that you interact with UPS on. We'll have people out in the field come in, they sit out. It's essentially on-campus office hours. You can come in and ask your questions about whatever it is that you want, any specific issues, any general issues. We will take that form, we'll use that form as an opportunity to announce things like the two items that I'm talking about here today. We'll be in Camden. July 10th is the first procurement day here in Camden. It's typically the first Wednesday of each month, and we rotate between one of the central campuses. We were in Newark last month. We'll be back in New Brunswick beginning of July, and then here in Camden in June in New Brunswick, July here in Camden, and then back in Camden next January. So we've scheduled them out over the course of a year. So we'll see you guys twice a year here. Our liaison who's dedicated to your campus, Chris Aho, is not here. Many of you know Chris. He does a great job for us. He'll be essentially the host that day. His supervisor, Mike Dunn, is here today, and I think Mike will probably be here that day as well as a couple of other people from Knightsbridge will come down and make sure all of your procurement questions are answered. So with that, if you have any questions about either any of the items that I presented, I'd be happy to answer them now, and we'll be around after. Terry? Need the mic. I feel the same way.
So I just wanted to mention two things. First, I just want to make sure that when you're weeding out or determining whether or not we need to add additional suppliers, that we're thinking about the fact that we do like to engage local business when it's appropriate. And secondly, that sometimes, not always, geography does play into the cost for us because
absolutely.
of our
I mean,
location.
in addressing that, we haven't gone through all of our procedures as far as what the criteria would apply as to what suppliers to add or not add. And we're not looking to purge the supplier roles. Now, this is really about getting better data. We do want to take a look at, because in order for us to leverage the spend of the university, we do need to be smart with our supplier database. But we certainly recommend, and this tool will help us, particularly in the area of supplier diversity. With certifications, that's another thing that can be brought into the system that we're not really capturing in a systematic way at this time. So we're certainly sensitive to those needs as well as the geographic needs, particularly of Newark and Camden, which have some different initiatives and priorities.
So kind of bouncing off of what Terry said, I'm part of a committee with an initiative to start using local businesses within Camden. The ACE program is great for us as requisitioners because we need less documentation up front for the PO.
Right.
What is the process of adding new vendors to the ACE program? I think when it first came out, I was told there was kind of a waiting list for it. Is there still a waiting list? How can I give you like maybe 5 vendors that I want to add that are local to us?
Sure. We are actually just about to start, we'll call it phase 2 of the ACE program. So the initial process was to go through, vet out several suppliers, and we've engaged 70 suppliers in this process. But we are going to supplement that. We'll have a new sourcing event sometime in the next couple of months. I'll make sure that Catherine Cunard, who's our category manager and our chief liaison for this project, make sure that she reaches out to the various campuses and get that input. And we'll be looking to add more suppliers. It's really just a way, to your point, it allows you to do business with these suppliers without having to gather up a bunch of paperwork on the front end. And the supplier portal will help with that in general too. But we will be having a second phase where we'll be able to supplement the ACE program. And so if in the first round, if I just go back there, you don't have enough local flavor, if you will, for these types of services, please bring that to our attention. And we can talk afterwards, or you can send an email to us, and we can certainly take that into account.
It's me again. So Kathy Detloff was nice enough to personally write me about the thing I always moan about, commitments and encumbrances and the accuracy of them.
Okay.
And I'd like to know if there's any updates and if they're more reliable than they were a year ago.
In terms of the encumbrance reporting,
Yes.
I would say they're more accurate than they were a year ago. We're always looking at that piece. That's something that is crucial. Obviously, the financial record is in Oracle. The encumbrances that are in Marketplace, we're doing our best to rationalize that, and we're cognizant of that, and we're trying to harmonize that in a little bit better way.
The suppliers that you currently have, do they negotiate discounted rates for Rutgers, or are they just easier into the system?
Are we talking about all of our suppliers or a particular area?
Well, like, I'm looking at especially writing and editing. We have a lot of professors that use those services that go out on their own and get proofreading done and so forth and so on. I don't know if cost relation, because they're using the research funds to do that. Are these suppliers negotiating a better rate for us?
What we did here, this is a type of a sourcing event where cost was not the primary driver, because what we would engage these firms in are a whole host of projects that the cost would be unknown. They've provided rate cards. Every contract has information about the suppliers as to generally what their costs are for the services that they provide. What we encourage you to do is to look at these vendors as a pool of resources that you can then have them bid against each other for your business, and that would help drive the cost to some extent. There's what we call a method of engagement with each of these contracts, and up to a certain amount you can just choose any one of the approved suppliers and move forward with them. But then if it's a larger scale project, then we do require that you actually have some type of competitive process among the awarded suppliers.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Well, we'll be around afterwards. Ann Gutzik is here from our expense management team, and so any questions that you might have, we'll be happy to stick around as well. Okay.
Which first? Casey. Okay. Here we go. Like to. There we go. Casey. I'd like to turn over to Casey Wood.
Thanks. And thanks for everyone for inviting us here today. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. I've interacted with a number of you through emails because I also cover the Open Public Records Act. I work with David's office very frequently. I am the one that's annoying all of you looking for these contracts. So thank you for being so helpful and welcoming today. This is, I would say, the most important slide that I will show you today. If you zone out of everything else that I tell you this morning, this is the most important thing you can take away. Our office is a resource. This is our contact information. I don't expect any of you to become experts in any of this, but know that we are here to answer the questions as they arise. So if you ever have a question, let us know. I know it's Friday, and I think just to liven up the discussion this morning, Mike was nice enough to invite ethics and compliance to really get things flavored in on a Friday. Again, I don't expect anyone to become an expert on this, but we do have experts in a number of different areas. So what is university ethics and compliance? We cover a number of different areas and risks throughout the university: reputational risks, financial risks, organizational risks. And this is our mission statement. I don't expect anyone to memorize this. It's up on our website. I don't have it memorized, but these are all the things that we do. These are some of the areas that we cover. We have compliance officers in all of these areas. Of course, I forgot to include ethics, which I'll be covering today. I knew I was going to miss something, and it's the one that I do. Perfect. And what are we talking about when we talk about ethics at Rutgers University? We're talking about a number of different things. We're talking about the integrity not only of the university, not only of you personally, your department, but the reputation of each of you, accountability, transparency. We're a public university. That means that we answer to our alumni, we answer to taxpayers. When something goes wrong at the university, as I'm sure many of you have seen, the first thing that goes in on NJ.com is Rutgers employee, Rutgers faculty member. That's what we want to try and keep the focus away from, some of those bad things that happen, and keep the focus on all the good things, all the great initiatives that we're working on at the university, and the ways that we're working for the best for the public. So how do we do that? One of the primary ways that we keep track of these things, keep track of conflicts of interest, is through reporting outside employment. And we do that on a website that we call Ethics Armor. This is where you would disclose if you have a secondary employment, if you have outside interests, if you are a leader in a volunteer organization, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the different ways that we report that. And why did we call it Ethics Armor? Because we are the Scarlet Knights. And it is really designed to protect each of you. And this is something that I tell to everyone. It's not something that we talk about specifically for this audience, but when I talk to facilities, when I talk to deans, when I talk to anyone, the first thing that happens if we get a question about someone who's working a second job and they say, you know, I saw so-and-so working outside the university and I know they work for Rutgers and I think they got that job because of their position here, something's going on, something's fishy, someone calls us and says, I see an issue. The first place we go is to Ethics Armor to see if there's been a disclosure. And if it's been disclosed and we have all the proper approvals, then we say, we know about it, there's no issues. But if it hasn't been disclosed and we don't have the proper approvals, then it starts to look a little bit more difficult and we have to come and find out what's actually going on. So that's why I say it's really designed to protect each of you. It's in your best interest to fill these out. Why does the university care about these things? We want to try to avoid conflicts of interest. We want to make sure there are no operational concerns. So if you do work a second job, that your hours aren't overlapping, that you're not leaving your university position early to go work at your second job. We're not trying to discourage people from earning extra money or working a second job. We just want to make sure that they're doing it in the most appropriate way. Like I said, we are a public university. We look for nepotism. We try to avoid that as well. You're not allowed to hire, fire, or supervise a relative. There's a lot of, Rutgers is a huge organization. There's a lot of relatives working at Rutgers. That's fine as long as they're not they don't have any personnel authority over a relative. That's where the question is. So if you do have a relative who's applying for a job, make sure you're not involved in that process. Tell the supervisor, whoever it is, my sibling is applying for a position, please don't involve me in any of those communications. If you have any questions, you can always call us. We want to make sure that you're not using any of your time or resources for personal gain. Obviously, you can use your email for personal issues. We just want to make sure that you're not doing that on university time for personal gain. The outside activity questionnaire I mentioned earlier, I do a little bit of the Public Records Act stuff. It's never going to be considered a public record. It's considered a personnel record. So if someone asks us for the outside activity questionnaire for oh dear, we're not going to release that. We're going to say that's a personnel record, that goes to the supervisor, and it goes to our office. It's not considered public. So this isn't something that we're doing to get into anybody's business, to find out what you're doing on your private time. We're never going to ask for any of your personal or religious affiliations, your political affiliations. It's really just to make sure that we're doing things in the most appropriate way possible here at the university. So what do we mean when we talk about secondary employment? It could be any of these things, a family business, per diem work, consulting, anything that you're being compensated for outside of university work. If you're in a leadership position in a volunteer organization, we're not looking for, regular volunteer work if you work at a faith-based organization on the weekends, or if you're doing community service, or if you, supervise your PTO, or you work for, or you volunteer at the Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts for one of your children or something like that. It's really if it's going to be something that's going to be taking up a lot of your time, where you're going to have to be signing documents that could potentially go to the state. We want to make sure that there's no conflicts there, and that it's not going to be an issue. Political activity, we're not going to ask. We don't ask for your political affiliations, but if you are considered running for office, or if you're working for a political campaign, give us a call. We can talk through some of the issues and potential issues that could arise there, and we would recommend that you disclose anything if you're working for a political campaign. You don't have to get into who you're working for or what the party affiliation is, but you can simply say, I'm canvassing for political candidates in my area, those sorts of things. Casino employment, this is one that goes back to the days when New Jersey was particularly concerned about the mob influence in Atlantic City. It's really pro forma at this point. Rutgers doesn't have a lot of interactions with New Jersey state casinos. So if you do have an immediate family member who's living in your household, who works at one of the New Jersey casinos, there's a box on the form, check it. We send a letter to the state saying they don't have anything to do with casinos here, and that's it. Like I said, it's a little pro forma at this point, but we do want to make sure that we're complying with the state's requirements there. I'm going to talk a little bit about gifts. Gifts between colleagues are totally acceptable. If you want to take your coworkers out to lunch, holiday gifts in the office, those sorts of things, totally appropriate. As long as it's not excessive or inappropriate. I haven't had any issues where people are saying, I'm receiving excessive gifts. Nobody's come to complain about the Lexus that their boss bought them or anything like that. We do occasionally get questions about inappropriate gifts, so please use your best judgment and realize this is a workplace. So that's something to worry about. We're not allowed to accept anything from the public. So it's nice to be here to talk to the finance folks, because you deal so much with the vendors, and this is where a lot of these issues arise. Is vendors trying to sort of wine and dine us, or get our business, those sorts of things. We as public employees, university policy, state law, we are not allowed to accept anything, especially from anyone that we do business with or we have a potential to do business with. There are limited exceptions to that, but best practice is to just not accept. If you're uncomfortable, if someone comes to you and offers you something and you don't want to offend anyone, and you accept it, just give us a call. We'll work through returning it to them, sending a letter explaining the policy, and then if it's something that's perishable and we can't return it, we have a list of local food banks and charities, and we'll donate those, and we'll donate them in the vendor's name, and then send a letter to the vendor saying, thank you for your gift, but we're not allowed to accept. So, like I said before, we talk a little bit sometimes about the newspaper test. So if you're not sure about something, one of the things we say is imagine if what you're doing now was in the newspaper tomorrow or on NJ.com tomorrow. There's not going to be a lot of, this was actually a Rutgers Day project that we did. There's not going to be a lot of good press for doing the right thing, right? We're not going to get huge headlines for doing our jobs every day, turning down the lunch from a vendor, those sorts of things. But we want to make sure that the focus at the university is on all of the great things that we're doing, on the research, the clinical operations, saving the university money, those sorts of things. We want to make sure that the focus is on that, and it's not on Rutgers faculty member is working a second job and, double dipping, self-dealing, working on a second business while he's at his office, or, those sorts of things. We want to make sure that the focus is on what's good. So, like I said, this is going to be the most important slide. I don't expect anyone to memorize any of this in this 10-minute presentation on a Friday morning, but if you want to ask questions, if you leave here and you're uncomfortable asking them in front of the crowd online or in front of the crowd in the office, send us an email, give us a call. We'll respond as best we can. We're a confidential resource, so if you have a question, we're not going to go back to your supervisor to say so-and-so was calling about this. We're going to try and answer as best we can to your questions. Okay? Anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
So I know what the answer is. I want you to talk about the answer. One of the things that sometimes is unclear or uncomfortable is when you go to a conference and you get invited to a dinner. I know one of the choices is not to go, but we also have the choice of paying for it. Can you speak to that so it's understood?
Yeah, so Mike brings up a great point. A lot of times at conferences, vendors will invite attendees to come to the pre-cocktail or dinner afterwards or those sorts of things, and they'll always offer to pay, almost always, depends on what field you're in. But if you do want to attend, because sometimes these are good networking opportunities and you can speak to different people in the field, if you do want to attend, make sure that you pay on your own, and either the university will reimburse if it's a business expense, or you can pay out of pocket. I would encourage you to keep a receipt in case there's ever a question down the road. Someone says, I saw so-and-so at this dinner with a bunch of vendors, and they paid for everybody's drinks and everything, and they were double dipping. Make sure that you, if you have a question about this, call us, but you can attend. The university would have to pay, or we'd have to pay out of pocket. You can't accept any of that from a vendor or from a potential business partner.
And just to follow up, most good vendors who do business already with a lot of governmental employees, they have processes to deal with this.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of it.
To be billed.
Yeah,
They
we're
pay a bill for it.
yeah. Mike's saying we're saying.
It says they don't.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more of the bigger companies especially, and a lot of the companies that we do business with more frequently, they're familiar with this, and there is a vendor code of conduct that we have as well in the state. But a lot of times they'll send a form saying, please get the signature from your ethics office that says you can attend this, and that either you're going to pay or that we can pay for it, and that it's within your organization's policies to accept that. So if you ever get a question or you see one of those forms, you can send it to our office and just give us a call and we'll work through it with you. And we do handle those pretty frequently. Any other questions? Thank you again so much for your time on a Friday morning and for inviting us here. I'm going to turn it over to Miranda Alfonso Williams, our Director of Privacy, and she's going to talk about way more exciting things than ethics.
Thanks, Casey. Good morning, everyone. So as Casey said, we're going to talk about privacy, the most exciting part of your day. And one of the things we've been doing, I was actually here in Camden just last week doing a FERPA presentation. We are required to comply with a whole host of laws. So here, this is just a sampling. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the things that we concentrate on a pretty consistent basis. So FERPA obviously has to do with student privacy. There's HIPAA that has to do with patient privacy. And with HIPAA, we're starting to work with some of the folks here in Camden. We'll be doing a risk assessment, just kind of gauging our level of compliance with HIPAA. There's something called breach notification. So we're required, and I use the term breach lightly, or not lightly, because a breach, when it happens, is something pretty significant. So what we'd have to do is, on the HIPAA side of the house, if a breach does occur, we have 60 days when the clock starts ticking in order to respond to that breach. Unfortunately or fortunately, we have had some, not a lot, but we deal with regulations on a pretty consistent basis. That's one of the things that the Privacy Office focuses on. So we have to be in compliance with these different laws. One that actually went into effect last year, GDPR, that impacts citizens in the EU. And basically it gives people in the EU more rights over how their information is handled. It seems that privacy in general is moving in that direction. There's a new privacy law that's going into effect in California, CCPA, that's going to happen at the beginning of next year. Whether or not it's going to be applicable to Rutgers, we have to still do an assessment to determine that. But just in general, we look at a whole host of laws, federal laws and state laws, and then obviously we look at ID theft. That's something that we've unfortunately have experienced to a small extent, but we have experienced it. One of the things that I wanted to note about how privacy is viewed here in the States, we approach privacy from a very sectored perspective. So you'll tend to, I've already mentioned HIPAA, so we talk about privacy in healthcare. We talk about privacy on the financial side of the house, government. So we have the Privacy Act of 1974. We have children and education, so I'd already mentioned FERPA. So we look at privacy in a very sectored fashion. When we get to other parts of the world, they don't deem us as having adequate protections with regard to privacy, because we don't have one overarching privacy law as it relates. We've taken a very sectored approach, and it works for us, but it creates issues when we get to other parts of the world. Another thing that we do here in the Privacy Office, we do lots of training. So one of the many things that Casey is responsible for is training. So we have an online platform called HealthStream. We also do face-to-face training. So these are just some of the areas that we cover. General privacy. Obviously, I talked about HIPAA, so we'll do, for example, we have on the RBHS side of the house, we have a lot of residents. So we've encountered situations where there's been a need to do customized training for residents because we've encountered, or they've done things, or we've encountered issues that need to be addressed. As I'd mentioned, I was here just last week doing a FERPA presentation, and a couple of months ago doing FERPA and HIPAA, where they intersect, if they intersect. So training from that standpoint. Also, social media. Social media is obviously, it's a great tool. What we find is it's not always used appropriately. We just had a situation at Robert Wood Johnson not long ago where there was a physician that actually got into a tweeting match with a resident at another facility, and he was tweeting misogynistic tweets, things that were very inappropriate. As a result, he had to step down from his position. We've had situations where we have, I'm going to use residents as an example again. On the healthcare side, I'm going to use dentistry as an example. They'll think, so we were talking about teeth. So they'll see a mouth that they think looks really cool. They'll want to take a picture of that patient and post it on Facebook, Instagram, what have you. Something like that is not appropriate without patient consent. So we have to always make sure that if we're using social media that we're doing it in an appropriate fashion. Another thing that's happening is phishing, and not the kind of fish that you eat. Phishing for credentials. So we've had situations, and actually the last one happened, I believe it was in December or January, where there were about 1,000 people that were impacted by a phishing scheme. Essentially, the way that it usually presents itself, we'll get an email, and the email will appear that it's from a legitimate source. And in this case, where these 1,000 people received the email, it appeared to be from a party inside of Rutgers. There was a link in the email, and there were some people that clicked on the link. So we're talking about bad actors. Bad actors are trying to get our information. We have a lot of valuable information here at Rutgers because we have healthcare information. Healthcare information is very valuable. Anybody here familiar with the dark web? Anybody been on the dark web? Okay, so the dark web is, I use the analogy, it's the Amazon of everything bad. So if you're looking for drugs, weapons, new identity, new passport, credit cards, hitman, anybody looking for a hitman? All available on the dark web. The other thing that's available on the dark web, which is significant in our space, is medical records. And a medical record on the dark web goes for retail $50 compared to a Social Security number, which is only $1. So we have very valuable information as it relates to our healthcare information. So one of the things we need to make sure that we're doing is safeguarding that healthcare information from bad actors. We do risk assessments, so they take many forms, quantitative, qualitative. We have what we call a 4-factor. I'm going to talk about breaches and investigations in a couple of minutes, and then I'll talk about the 4-factor. So one of the things that we will do, and we're going to be doing it here in Camden, one of my contacts here is Mary Beth Daisy. Everybody know Mary Beth? Okay, so we're going to be doing a risk assessment on some of the clinical areas, and we'll be doing physical walkthroughs of space to see what kind of protected health information we can find, because now you know the value of health information. So we want to make sure that that information is properly secure. So we will do physical walkthroughs of space, and that's part of the risk assessment process. I talked about investigations. So these are examples of some of the types of investigations we do. Inadvertent disclosures are very popular, unfortunately more common than I'd like to admit. So an example of that would be you have a patient, John Smith that's 25 and a John Smith that's 50, sending information to the wrong John Smith. So something like that happens, again, more often than I would like to admit. Improper disposal. When we do these walkthroughs, we're looking for unsecured protected health information. You may hear the acronym PHI for protected health information. And then we do investigations as they relate to FERPA. So one of the things when we talk about the student privacy law is that students have the ability to file complaints. They can do that in 2 ways. They can go to the Department of Education and file it that way, or they can file it internally. Casey had some contact information. We have a compliance hotline, so that's one way that they can file complaints. So that's a type of investigation that we do. And in the world of privacy, in the world of HIPAA specifically, there's what we call the HIPAA wall of shame. And what the HIPAA wall of shame is anytime there's a breach that impacts more than 500 people, it needs to be reported. So depending on the size, obviously to the patient, to the regulators, so Health and Human Services, and if it's really big, to the media. So anything that impacts more than 500 patients or individuals ends up on the HIPAA wall of shame. So why is that significant? If there is a breach, and again, I don't use that term lightly, it could result in fines. And this is just an illustration of how the fines are tiered. They are broken out into 4 different buckets. The first one being did not know. The fine can be anywhere from $100,000 to $50,000. With the most egregious being willful neglect not corrected, and that can be anywhere from $50,000 to $1.5 million. So I'm thinking of an example of a breach that happened with a University of Massachusetts Amherst. They had malware in their system. They knew that it was there. They didn't do anything about it. As a result, they were fined $650,000. So obviously that's pretty significant. We're talking to finance people. We obviously wouldn't want to incur those types of fines. So that's just kind of consequences if we don't get it right. So that's part of the reason why we do what we do. Here goes our website again. There's a link for, I have FAQs. So we have FAQs. Casey had a slide up that had the different areas that represent university ethics and compliance. And we have FAQs for various areas. There's an email if you have any privacy-specific questions. The email address is right here. And then there is the front page of our website. And with that, are there questions? Going once? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. So Miranda talked about phishing. The other thing that has happened of late, in fact, someone tried to impersonate me recently in terms of changing my direct deposit information. So that has happened more than a few times, and they are getting more sophisticated about it. So this is something that we're paying quite a lot of attention to in terms of if you make a request for that and you get extra questions about, to make sure you're you in that, that's the reason why. We had one of my colleagues whose paycheck was redirected, and it was a very sophisticated piece of work. The one that purportedly me was less sophisticated the other day. Thank you, Steve. But if you have, if you get emails that are asking for your credentials, you should know that those are never going to come from the university without, your IT person coming and talking with you. And if they are trying to get you to sign into something through a link, very often it looks like it may be Rutgers, but if you go look at the website, it really isn't, or the email addresses are not. Be very careful, because we are being attacked every day by that. And we have had instances where pay has been redirected successfully. So I'd like to open up now for just general questions, or we have a lot of good minds here and resources, and if we don't know, we can get answers. Anything in general? Anything specific? Anything at all? Amber. Hold on.
So if we do get phishing emails, do we forward those to privacy and IT to let them know these are just to IT? Okay.
Yeah, that's important, so they can track them down. And in some cases, we need to involve our UPD in these cases. So, any other questions? Well, thank you all for your time. We'll stick around down here for any follow-up and such. Appreciate being here, and again, we'll have information. You got information about the procurement event, which will be in July? Yeah. And then we will get information as soon as we pin down the date on the F&A training. And then, do you have any? You were here for FERPA, and you're going to come back for 3 weeks for the HIPAA review.
Our office is planning to come back in the fall.
Yeah, okay. So thank you all. Have a great weekend. That's it.